All right. So someone sent us a statement,
Okay.
and it's really sparked some debate.
Mm-hmm.
They said, President Trump is a fascist and an aspiring dictator,
Wow.
a self-described human wrecking ball on modern liberal democracy.
Oh.
Now, that's a
Yeah,
loaded statement.
it is.
We're not here to take sides,
Right.
but we are going to dive deep into the why.
Yeah, the why behind such a strong claim.
Exactly.
All right, I'm ready.
So we've got a really fascinating mix of sources to help us.
Okay.
We've got excerpts from the Washington Post and the New York Times, thought-provoking pieces from the Atlantic,
Right.
even some scholarly papers that compare Trump to
Interesting.
historical figures.
That's that range of perspectives is key.
Yeah.
It lets us really explore all the nuances of this
Right.
complex topic.
Exactly, and not just fall into those simple
Right.
for or against camps.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's jump in with something that honestly made my jaw drop.
Okay.
Elon Musk's actions at DOGE, firing thousands of federal employees,
Wow.
freezing billions in funding.
I mean, it sounds like something out of a political thriller.
It really does.
But what's really interesting is how it all happened.
Yeah.
You see, Musk exploited a legal loophole,
Yeah.
the special government employee designation.
Okay.
It was designed for temporary specialized roles.
Right.
Never intended for someone to wield such sweeping power.
Wow. So a system designed for one purpose
Right.
gets hijacked for something completely different.
Yeah,
That's a bit unsettling,
it is unsettling.
to say the least.
Absolutely. And it gets even more complex
Okay.
when you start to factor in the weakened cybersecurity laws.
Right.
I mean, these laws meant to protect against hackers and foreign threats.
Uh-huh.
They unintentionally gave DOGE access to sensitive data on a scale
Oh, wow.
that no one ever anticipated.
It makes you wonder about the unintended consequences
Yeah.
of any law or any system, right?
Oh, it certainly does. And it highlights the need for constant vigilance.
Yeah.
For adapting to new realities and new vulnerabilities.
Now, this next part really caught my attention.
Okay.
We have conservative Republicans who are absolutely furious
Right.
with Obama's executive actions.
Uh-huh.
Yet they seem perfectly fine with Trump's even more aggressive approach.
It's a fascinating contradiction, isn't it?
It is.
One former GOP representative even said,
Okay.
yeah, but I like what they're doing.
Wow, so it seems like the outcome
Yeah.
is more important than the process.
It seems that way.
For some,
Yeah.
even if it means undermining traditional checks and balances.
And that could set a dangerous precedent.
Right.
For future presidents, regardless of party.
What happens when someone we don't like
Exactly.
comes along and uses those same tactics?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
It forces us to confront our own biases
Yeah,
and ask ourselves, are we truly committed to these democratic principles?
right.
Or do we only support them when it benefits our side?
Okay, let's tackle the big intimidating word in the room.
Okay.
Fascism.
All right.
Some of the scholarly papers we have use terms like
Yeah.
palingenetic ultranationalism.
I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right.
It's a mouthful,
You did.
but it's actually a pretty straightforward concept.
Okay, good.
So it's basically like a yearning for a mythic past,
Huh?
this golden age,
Right.
combined with intense nationalistic sentiment.
So that make America great again kind of thinking.
Exactly.
How would you...
Nostalgia for a simpler time.
But it's not just about the nostalgia. It's about how that feeling is manipulated.
Okay.
Fascist leaders, they position themselves as the only ones
You only want
who can restore that lost greatness.
Right.
So they become like the embodiment of the will of the people.
Uh-huh.
And they use that to justify actions that override democratic processes.
So it's not just about feeling patriotic.
Right.
It's about a leader exploiting that sentiment for their own gain.
Precisely. And that's where it starts to get really dangerous.
All right, now let's look at some specific examples
Okay.
of Trump's rhetoric.
Okay.
The sources are full of them, draining the swamp,
Mm-hmm.
attacking elites, constantly using that crisis rhetoric.
Right.
America is no longer great,
Yeah.
exaggerating threats from immigrants.
And we can't forget about the glorification of strength and violence.
Oh, yeah.
Those knock the crap out of them comments at rallies.
And, of course, the constant attacks on the press,
Yeah,
labeling them enemies of the American people.
These are all classic tactics used to sow division,
Right.
undermine trust in institutions.
It's like creating this us versus them mentality,
Exactly.
where anyone who disagrees is automatically an enemy.
Yeah. And that's incredibly dangerous
Yeah.
because it really erodes that foundation of civil discourse.
Right.
It creates a climate where violence can actually seem justified.
And we saw a horrifying example of this on January 6th.
Yes, we did.
Speaking of history, you brought up some uncomfortable parallels.
Yeah.
The rise of Hitler in the Weimar Republic. Now, I know we're not equating the two directly,
Of course not.
but there are some striking similarities
Yeah.
in how they exploited existing political systems,
Right.
particularly how established conservatives underestimated them
Uh-huh.
and saw them as a means to their own ends.
Right. They thought they could control them.
Yeah.
Both Trump and Hitler. They used fear of the left and political instability to gain power.
It's a stark reminder that history doesn't repeat itself exactly,
Right.
but it often rhymes.
It does.
And understanding those echoes can help us navigate the present, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those patterns and those warning signs.
Right.
Not about predicting the future,
Yeah.
but by studying the past,
Yeah.
we can hopefully avoid making the same mistakes.
Exactly. So we were just discussing
Yeah.
some pretty unsettling historical parallels.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, once Trump was in power,
Right.
did his actions align with this idea of fascist leadership?
Yeah.
What did he actually do as president?
Well, there are definitely some examples that,
Yeah.
that raise eyebrows, like
Yeah.
take his demand for absolute loyalty from his party,
Right.
punishing anyone who dared to dissent.
Yeah.
It echoes that classic fascist tendency towards a single, all-powerful, unquestioned leader.
And let's not forget his disregard for democratic norms,
Yeah.
undermining independent agencies,
Right.
brushing aside court orders, spreading misinformation.
It's like chipping away at the foundations of a building. You might not see the damage right away, but the
Right.
structure gets weaker over time.
Exactly. And what's really concerning
Yeah.
is how these behaviors become normalized.
Right. What might seem shocking at first gradually becomes
Yeah.
accepted, even expected.
And that's how democratic safeguards erode,
Yeah.
almost without us noticing.
Almost.
And then there's his foreign policy,
Oh, yeah.
cozying up to authoritarian leaders like Putin and Kim Jong-un,
Right.
while alienating our traditional allies.
That's a pretty significant departure from past presidents, wouldn't you say?
It is, and it raises questions
Mm-hmm.
about his understanding of America's role in the world.
Right.
Is he deliberately undermining democratic norms?
Right. Or is it simply a byproduct of his America First ideology?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but it's definitely something worth considering.
Definitely.
Okay, I have to ask about something
Yeah.
that really jumped out at me from the sources.
Okay.
All those lawsuits, the court orders he tried to ignore,
Right.
the whole debate about the unitary executive theory.
Oh, yeah. What was that all about?
What was that all about?
Well, the unitary executive theory basically argues
Okay.
that the president has complete control over the executive branch.
Okay.
It's a pretty controversial idea.
Right.
And legal scholars are divided on its validity.
So not exactly a clear-cut legal situation.
Not at all.
But even putting aside the legalities,
Right.
didn't Trump's embrace of this theory reveal something about his mindset?
It certainly it suggests a desire for unchecked power,
Right.
a belief that he shouldn't be bound by the normal checks and balances
Right.
of our system.
Which is, of course, the opposite of how our democracy is supposed to work.
Right.
Shared power accountability, ensuring no single person becomes too powerful.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
And when a president starts defying court orders,
Yeah.
ignoring congressional oversight, it really undermines the
Right.
very foundation of our democracy. It's like saying,
What?
the rules don't apply to me.
And we saw this play out
Yeah,
in a lot of ways during his presidency.
we did.
His attempts to fire officials who were investigating him.
Right.
His refusal to cooperate with congressional inquiries.
And then there's that infamous quote you mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah.
He who saves his country does not violate any law.
A pretty bold statement.
It is.
It's like he saw himself above the law.
Yeah.
This savior figure who could justify anything, as long as it was in the name of saving the country.
And that kind of thinking can be incredibly dangerous.
It can.
It opens the door to authoritarianism,
Right.
to a system where the leader decides what's right and wrong,
Right.
regardless of what the laws say.
We've talked about the impact on the country as a whole.
Yeah.
But what about the Republican Party?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
It seems like they went through
Yeah.
a major transformation during this time.
They did. The party that once championed limited government and individual liberty
Right.
now seems willing to embrace strongman tactics
Yeah.
and authoritarian tendencies as long as it serves their political goals.
It's pretty ironic, isn't it?
It is.
They were so quick to criticize Obama for using executive power.
Right.
Yet they seem to have no problem with Trump
Hmm.
doing the same thing, often on an even grander scale.
It raises some uncomfortable questions
It does.
about the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And about American democracy itself. If one party is willing to just abandon its core values
Right.
in pursuit of power,
Yeah.
what does that mean for the long-term health
Yeah.
of our political system?
It's a question we all need to be grappling with.
We do.
But let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
One thing that really struck me in all this research was Trump's constant use of misinformation.
Oh, yeah.
He'd just make things up, repeat them over and over,
Yeah.
even when they were clearly false.
That's another classic tactic of authoritarian leaders. They understand that if you control the narrative,
Right.
you control the people.
Right.
And by constantly repeating lies, even the most outlandish ones,
Yeah.
they can create this alternate reality
Yeah.
where truth becomes irrelevant.
It's like gaslighting
It is.
on a national scale. And the scary thing is,
I know.
it seemed to work on a
Yeah.
significant portion of the population.
It did, and that speaks to the power of propaganda
Yeah.
and to the vulnerability of people who are looking for those simple answers in such a complex world.
So how do we combat that?
Right.
How do we break through the echo chambers and get people to think critically
Yeah.
about the information they're consuming?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
It's going to require a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
We need to support independent journalism, strengthen media literacy education,
Yeah.
and encourage respectful dialogue across ideological divides.
Easier said than done.
Oh, it is, especially in today's hyper-partisan environment.
Right.
But it's absolutely essential if we want to protect our democracy from the corrosive effects of misinformation and propaganda.
You know, we keep coming back to these historical parallels.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Weimar Republic earlier, and it makes me think about how those echoes of the past can inform our understanding of the present.
It's not about drawing direct equivalences,
Right.
but it's about recognizing those patterns. Both Trump and Hitler exploited fear, resentment, and political instability to gain power.
Right.
And both benefited from establishment figures who underestimated them,
Yeah.
viewing them as useful idiots who could be controlled.
And as history tragically shows, that strategy can backfire
Oh, it can.
in spectacular and devastating ways.
Absolutely. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of playing with fire,
Yes.
of embracing those authoritarian tactics,
Right.
even for what seem like noble ends.
Right.
Because once those forces are unleashed,
Yeah.
it can be incredibly difficult to contain them.
And that brings us to a very specific and very disturbing event.
Okay.
The January 6th attack on the Capitol.
A dark day for American democracy, no doubt.
January 6th.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe it's been years since that day.
I know.
The images are still so vivid,
They are.
so disturbing.
It was a day that shook
Yeah.
the very foundations of American democracy.
It was a mob.
Attacking the Capitol, attempting to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power.
It's something most of us
Yeah.
never thought we'd see in our lifetime.
Never.
The sources we have paint
Yeah.
a pretty chilling picture of that day. A mob of Trump supporters, fueled by his rhetoric
Right.
and those baseless claims of a stolen election,
Yes.
storming the Capitol building.
It felt like something out of a dystopian novel.
It really did.
And it's crucial to remember that this wasn't just a spontaneous outburst of anger.
Right.
This was a planned and coordinated attack
Wow.
with links to extremist groups
Uh-huh.
and a clear intention to intimidate lawmakers and overturn the election results.
So this wasn't just about protesting.
No.
This was about an attempt to overthrow the government.
The evidence presented during Trump's second impeachment trial,
Right.
as well as the ongoing investigations,
Mhm.
they strongly suggest that he played a central role
Yeah.
in inciting this insurrection.
His speech that day,
Yes, right before the attack.
right before the attack, was filled with inflammatory language,
It was.
urging his supporters to fight like hell
Right.
and march down to the Capitol.
Exactly. And even though he didn't explicitly tell them to storm the building,
Right.
his words clearly created a climate of violence
Yeah.
and encouraged his followers to take matters into their own hands.
So are we saying that Trump is directly responsible for the violence that occurred that day?
Attributing direct responsibility is a complex legal question,
Right.
and I'm not qualified to answer that.
Of course.
But what we can say is that his actions,
Yeah.
his words, his persistent lies about a stolen election,
Right.
they created the conditions that made this attack possible.
And that's incredibly disturbing.
It is.
By itself.
It demonstrates how a leader, especially one with a large and devoted following, can use their platform to manipulate people and incite violence.
Absolutely. And it raises serious concerns about the future of American democracy. If a sitting president can attempt to overturn an election and incite an insurrection with seemingly no consequences, what's to prevent it from happening again?
That's a chilling thought.
It is. So where do we go from here? How do we heal the divisions that have been so starkly exposed? And how do we prevent something like this from ever happening again?
That's the challenge of our time, isn't it?
It feels like it.
It's going to require a commitment to truth and accountability, a willingness to engage in respectful dialogue, and a shared belief in the fundamental principles of democracy.
It feels like such a daunting task.
It is.
Where do we even begin?
It starts with each of us. We need to be informed, engage in our communities, hold our elected officials accountable, and actively defend the values that underpin a healthy democracy.
It sounds like you're saying we can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in safeguarding our democracy. It requires vigilance, participation, and a willingness to challenge those who seek to undermine it.
Well said.
Thank you.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From Elon Musk at DOGE to the halls of Congress. From historical parallels to the very definition of fascism. It's been a heavy but essential conversation.
It has, and I hope our listeners come away from this not with a sense of despair, but with a renewed commitment to engage with these complex issues.
That's the key, isn't it?
It is.
This deep dive is just a starting point.
Exactly.
We've provided some information, some context, some different perspectives. Now it's up to each of you, our listeners, to continue exploring. To keep asking questions.
Be learning.
To keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Because in the end, the future of our democracy depends on all of us.
That's a powerful note to end on.
It is.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Keep those conversations going.
Please do.
And keep fighting for the kind of world you want to live in.
Absolutely.